Welcome back to the Camp Memories podcast from Kramer to the Hill. We are pleased to bring you part one of our three-part conversation with John Bard, who for 25 years was the executive chef and ran the camp's off-season events and brought countless iconic meals that we know that you're all thinking about right now. In part one, we talk about John's start in the food service industry and how he got to camp. Enjoy! Hello again, and welcome back to Camp Memories from Kramer to the Hill. I am your host, Paul Roberts, along with Dr. Paul Schneider, Catherine Roberts, and we're here today to welcome food chef extraordinaire, John Bard. Hello, John. How are you today?
Good, good. Thanks for having me.
Well, great. So, to get things started, what got you into the food service industry?
Well, what we were talking about off air, I started in a Mexican restaurant in Washington, D.C. in, oh gosh, I don't know. I was 14 years old. We won't tell the year, but I was 14 years old, and then I loved it there, washing dishes in a three-compartment sink. Out of high school, I worked in several restaurants, but then out of high school, I went to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. Graduated there and with a few friends, packed up a van and a U-Haul trailer and moved to Long Beach, California, where I was an executive chef for a hotel, a local hotel there in Long Beach downtown. And then I was inspired to be Wolfgang Puck, of course. That was the famous chef back then. And so I worked with a lot of chefs and tried to make my way through the industry. And I was always the guy, I was always a logistic kind of chef. Like these famous guys that I worked for would come up with this grandiose plan or idea or dish or whatever. And I would always be the guy that would execute, that would, have run the guys around, make sure that everything's prepped and ready to go and that kind of thing. And so I worked for a lot of places and I got into more corporate food service, like running corporate cafeterias for the power company that had 5,000 employees in a big area. And I would run that and that kind of thing because it was a Monday through Friday job. Then I got into working for a famous guy in Santa Monica, Bruce Martyr, who ran the Broadway Deli on 3rd Street Promenade when that first opened. And when the
Mhm.
dinosaurs didn't have vines all over them, it was when it first started. And I worked at a place called West Beach Cafe and Rebecca's, which was in Venice, again for a famous guy, and I was kind of the logistics guy. And I actually answered an ad in the paper because I was looking for, I met my wife and we were starting to have a family and I answered an ad in the paper for Aramark Corporation. And Aramark is a big corporation. They run like Dodger Stadium and a bunch of places. And they said, we got this unique situation in Malibu and you got to live there, but, go check it out. So I drove up. I'd never been that far north in Malibu. I drove up there, and Felipe was sitting at the desk of the kitchen with his feet up on the desk, reading the paper. And I said, "Oh, I'm here to, check it out." He goes, I go, "Where's the chef?" And he says, he's up at the hilltop." So I drove up to Hilltop, and of course, you drive that road and you're just blown away, you know. And so by the time I got up there, I was like, I gotta have this job. I'm not leaving. So, so the guy that was in charge, I forgot his name. He was a magician. I remember that. He was like showing me card tricks. I'm like, okay, whatever. So he showed me around, and he showed me the house that the kitchen, the house that the chef lives in, and it had the soccer field in front of it. I don't even think the soccer field was here there at that point. It was like dirt, and they
Right.
just built the tennis courts, and the house was like a mishmash of things because apparently the original house was two rooms, but the chefs had added on.
Mhm.
And so it was kind of Mickey Mouse, and part of it was like held up with rocks. I
Yeah,
remember that,
exactly.
and it was like just it was an interesting place. But my wife, who was 4 or 5 months pregnant with our second child, says, "I can do this." And that was the that was the ticket to ride because, I was ready to go. So we moved in November, I remember, 1993, and nothing happened. There wasn't a group. There wasn't really any employee. All the employees were at other locations that Aramark ran because it was kind of slow in the winter time. And so I was there like 3 weeks and nothing happened. And then Christmas, or actually the New Year's of that year, I had our first group called the Traditional Music Society, which was the coolest group. They all played banjos and violins and just classical type traditional American music. And they were just so nice and they'd been coming there for years and years and they were just great. And so a couple cooks came back from the various places and we all put on this weekend, New Year's weekend long event as my first event. So it was terrific. They had a an auction, like a silent auction of all these little knickknacks, and my wife would come up and silent auction all the knickknacks, and we got a couple things, and so that was awesome. So yeah, and so that's how it kind of started.
I love it. That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's that's just great.
yeah,
So
yeah.
tell us what was your first summer of 1994 like?
Uh, it was. Well, first, my daughter was born in May 19th. So, my second daughter. So we were like, blown away.
I vaguely
Um,
remember when she was a baby.
right? And so that started that. And actually, going back a second, when I got the job, I remember going to see Steve Brewer at the temple. And that was when they had this, he had a big office and his desk was there. And I walk in and I'm so nervous because I want this job so bad. And he goes, "You got the job. Don't worry." That was the first thing out of his mouth. And he goes, "Okay, so we're gonna, you just sit down, relax, tell me what you need." So that was awesome, and that really started my relationship with Steve, and it was just terrific. So, but the first year was interesting because Howard was hired. I was probably there 3 or 4 months before Howard was hired. I think he was hired in March or something that year. And so, and we had a person in between us. I can't remember her name, but she kind of set up the groups and set up summer camp, and she was kind of the liaison between us. And so summer camp came, and I was logistically I was fine, and so I kind of figured it out, and I kept the traditions going and that kind of thing, and started to build the team of crew that we had. Who was up at Hilltop? I forgot his name too. Not very good with names, but we had a guy up at Hilltop that ran Hilltop, and he had 4 or 5 people up there. He ran that, and I kind of ran downstairs, and we just kind of went that way. So I hadn't taken full control over the whole thing at that point. So, and I was still under the Airmark
Umbrella, yeah.
umbrella. So I had somebody that would come in from the outside that would kind of help me manage the place for a little bit or, kind of get my feet on the ground. And it was Howard's idea and Howard and Steve's idea to buy me out of my Airmark contract and go solo like the next off season. So I was only with Airmark for about a year.
Okay. All right. That
Yeah.
that that was actually one of my follow-up questions is when
Yeah.
did Howard and Steve decide to buy out and bring you into the family?
Bring it into the family. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I got to tell you, Howard Kaplan. If it wasn't for Howard Kaplan coming on and really, starting to not fix up the place, but kind of have a direction, I probably would never have stayed. In fact, I wouldn't have stayed. Um, it's just he just came in and he like redid the cabins and he, got the fields together and he did the climbing walls and that all that kind of stuff was all him. And all
Mm,
I did was put out good quality food and make sure that everybody was happy. And he really led the charge of putting the place on a good path. So yeah,
yeah.
I
Oh, that's good.
feel good about that. So
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Before we go into like the rest of your camp side of things, obviously I grew up with your daughters, with Miranda and Nika, and I distinctly remember. I think this was probably around the time that Nika was born, like the extension that you guys were building onto the house, or there was something that you were building in the house
right.
to make it slightly more coherent. But I think like Nika's room, you had to go into Nika's room to get to Miranda's room. So what was that like? Just like settling into the house, especially once this became a longer term thing, and then of course raising both of your children at the property of a summer camp with a beach outside your door, technically.
I know I hit the home run, didn't I? I mean, I jogged around those bases for 25 years.
Yeah.
Um, again, Howard Kaplan, he had the vision for that, and Howard was rebuilding the cabins, and he like redid Leadership Village because there used to be tents,
Yep.
as I'm sure Paul and Paul remember. Yeah, and so Howard had a team on in the off season, two or three guys that were rebuilding those leadership cabins and also the other cabins as well. And I think Pinus Village also was all rebuilt by those guys. It was a couple-year process, but we had a friend in town that was an architect, and Nina did a trade because Nina was doing facials and stuff. Nina did a trade with his wife, and so we got plans for the addition. And basically, they took out a room and then they built an L onto the house. And the one in the front was Nina's office, and then Nika's room was kind of the original, and then Miranda's room was in on the other side of the L, and um, and so the temple paid for like the materials, and then sent the guys that were building the cabins down to do the addition, and then I would pay for, and I would do a lot of sweat equity in putting painting it and putting in the tile floor and the kind of the niceties to make it a home. And so that worked out really well. I think the kids lived in the living room for about 2 months while we did all that, but that was cool. And I also built the fence around the place, and I built the front deck, and so that we had a place to look. And Nika's complaint was that we didn't have a mailbox, and she still holds that on me to this day.
I can
And
imagine she would.
yeah, 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 yeah. And so she didn't have a mailbox, and I had to drive her to her friend's house to their houses. She couldn't ride her bike to her friends' houses.
Right.
Those were her two complaints in the world. But the ocean view, living with the top 1%, yeah, it doesn't really matter. I don't know. I thought I did well.
I you
It worked
did.
out.
Absolutely.
It worked
Absolutely.
out. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Great.
yeah.
So, yeah. So, John, something you and I share is that, maybe 1984, 86, something like that. I spent the summer as what was then called dining hall manager at Kramer.
Uh,
And that was because I was actually the piano player with my other Paul, and they said, well, we don't really have a job called piano player. So, if you want to be at camp and be the piano player, you should take a real job. Yeah. So, okay. So I was dining hall manager for a summer. And as I think back to that experience, I can't think that there was anyone in your position or anything like your position. So back in the day, more or less, there were some cooks in the kitchen who were, I believe, summer workers who would come back summer after summer, but I don't think any of them were essentially in charge. And I don't think any of them were with any kind of program, if you will, to build up a culinary program at camp or to be in charge of it. So when you started, were you the beginning of that function, or had anybody been doing it before you?
Great question. I think my skill set really adapted well. I think everything came together at camp, with me and then Howard and, just the whole thing because I made it all up. I really made it all up. I mean,
That's what we all
I
kind of
had,
did at camp in our own
right,
time. Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
I was kind of when I had a job at a with a corporate job, and I hate to, it was the first job where I used a computer to, have recipes or write a schedule on a computer. It used to be pencil and paper, and chefs would just look in books or whatever to make recipes. And I'm really a technique guy when it comes to recipe. I don't have a lot of recipes. I'm more of a technique kind of chef, which is you roast a chicken, this is how you roast a chicken, this is how you make brisket. There's no real recipe. It's just you 325, 4 hours, salt and pepper, da da da, onion, it's kind of that way. And that's how I taught my guys. But I also started to formulate kind of a plan, like, a 3 week rotating menu where you don't see the same thing, or the popular things you might see every week or every 10 days. But, you had a rotating menu where you weren't double chickening or double Italian night, or Italian back to back, or Mexican for lunch and then Mexican for breakfast or whatever. So that I started to rotate both the ethnicity of the dishes, but also the protein, whatever the protein may be, chicken, beef, fish if we did it, that kind of stuff. So I was able to start to formulate those kind of things and kind of a structure with job descriptions and that kind of thing. And one of the big things that happened was early on, I guess, I'm not quite sure how many years in, but we got the outdoor science school in the off season. And the outdoor science school allowed us to keep people all year round and to start to build on the off-season business. So at the height, we had probably had 30 people that were full time all year round. And so that lends to that consistency. And so summer camp almost became like just a really big group that was there for 10 weeks. So that really helped out a lot in the consistency and the heightening of the quality and all that kind of stuff. So
I can say that your consistency and your attention to detail on the menus is something that, you know, obviously, different kitchens are going to give us different products, but I know that at camp now, there's always the question of like, what's for dinner, what's for breakfast is always like the big ask. The only thing that we always know is we know that breakfast is going to be eggs and potatoes and some sort of other protein side. But I think that was one of the things that has stood out as like very significant from your time, running the kitchens at camp is, being very meticulous and being very intentional about the types of food that you're spoiling all of us with.
I'm
thank you.
sorry I missed out on all of this. It sounds really good, Katie.
It was a
We
great way
didn't
to
have
grow
that.
up.
Yeah,
Well, that was part one of our three-part conversation with John Bard, the former executive chef of Camp Kramer and Gindling Hilltop Camp. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss when part 2 comes out, in which we will be talking about John's kosher-style menus, the great 2003 food fight, his favorite dinner, and more. Don't forget to mark your calendars for camp's upcoming events in Carlsbad this summer, including Mitzvah Night on June 27th, Shabbat 75 on Friday, July 24th, and Leadership Night on Saturday, July 25th. If you haven't heard from camp in a while, you can update your contact info by visiting wbtcamps.org/alumni/update your info, which is linked down in the description, and that's how you'll be able to hear when registration opens for all the events. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
1, 2, wash your hands.